that we're looking for. Want to get some nice long hair out of here, and soft bucktail works better than real heavy, stiff bucktail. What we want to do is don't overdress this fly. This, again, is a tendency to overdress. We just take some light bucktail, strip the excess stuff out of it, decide how long we want it. We want it that long. Just cut this on a little taper. This time I don't bother putting glue on. You'll see why. Start here and wrap smoothly, keeping the bucktail on the top of the hook shank. Just keep this bucktail right up here on top like this, all the way back on the straight section. Then return. Now what you have is a nice even body. Now if you take a piece of mylar or tinsel and wrap it in here, put your bobbin on the cradle. Oh, my fault. You know what an expert is, don't you? Expert's a guy that's an unknown factor, and spurts a drip under pressure, so even experts get screwed up all the time. Lay this on your bobbin. You don't have to make a knot there. Now here's where this rotary vise comes in handy. We can roll this back here like this, you see, and if you use this one finger here to kind of push this, you can make a beautiful, nice, even body all the way back. This is a fly a lot of people don't use anymore, but it really is a dandy fly. Very good fly, for example, for stripers. Come back up, and by double wrapping, you end up, since we're human, we err, and so if you double wrap, what you're doing is you're keeping the chance of having gaps in your mylar showing. So if you go down and back, you've included the chance that you've got rid of all that. So nice, you get a nice even body. Now the fly is almost finished. What you can do now, and incidentally, this fly can be tied, reverse tied too, just like an upside down, have the hook up here and the wing reversed. Again, don't overdress. Bring this up here, make sure it's nice back on here. Trim this. This time I do put just a tiny little bit of cement on the front end. That cement goes right all the way through. You can also, if you like, now this is a modern adaptation, but you can put, and I do like this, I put about 2 strands of crystal flash on either side, just short. I don't bother to trim one longer than the other. I just put them on short, just to add a little bit more realistic flash to the fly. Whip finish your fly. And you can pull this up and get the slack out, but you'll get in less trouble if you bring it up on the scissors like that. Put a little cement on there. And your fly's finished. You got yourself a Joe Brooks blonde. Basically, that's all it is. You got a white wing, nice minnow-like shape. This is a glass minnow. Basically, it's a standard streamer fly. Usually we tie this wing with either calf tail or buck tail, depending on how long. It's usually not a very long fly. Glass minnows are usually very small flies. Very good on bonita, very good on snook, and many sort of inshore fishes. Most of the time we tie it with a back which imitates a sort of bait fish, but sometimes we'll put a bright color like red and white. Seems to be a very good combination. This one, you notice, has no dark back on it at all. One of the things we almost always do is paint an eye on these. The main difference between this and standard streamers is this is a very, very tough streamer. The bodies on most of these flies get torn up, this tinsel. So a guy named Carl Hansen over in St. Pete, Florida, came up with the idea many years ago of overwrapping the body with monofilament. We use generally somewhere between 15 and 20 pound test monofilament. We can use gold and put gold underneath it here under yellow or light colored, different colors of monofilament, or we can use clear. That's up to you. The main thing is that this monofilament really protects this body. In fact, this is a standard technique now in what we call the Crazy Charlie bonefish fly, of overwrapping with monofilament. And basically the difference between this and standard streamers is that we're going to overwrap this body with mono. Bear in mind it can be used on other fly patterns. Let's see how we do this. Okay, to make a glass minnow, what you're basically doing is making a simple streamer, but you're going to use it with sort of an armor-coated body. To make the body nice and smooth, I'd suggest that you wrap this thing, don't have to be perfect, but pretty much wrap it all the way down on the straight part of the shank. At this point, you'll want to put in a piece of monofilament. What I have here is a piece of 20 pound. If you want to use heavier monofilament, it's going to make a lump here. What you can do is just take a single edge razor blade and shave this stuff in and shave it to a point. That will let you, and if you start your tie right where you started to shave and then wind back, what will happen is you get a nice smooth taper here that you can't even see where you've tied the monofilament in. Once you have the monofilament in, just put it out of the way and then add your whatever color. You may use gold, you may use silver, but whatever type tinsel you want to use, you wrap the body with tinsel. Since tinsel is very fragile, this monofilament is going to prevent this stuff from coming unwrapped. So put this over here, and then again, that rotary vise really helps. Let me get just a little bit of this monofilament off. There we are. Start her over. Wrap her down here, and use that finger to guide your tinsel, and you get a nice smooth body. Back to right to where you started wrapping. Repeat the whole thing and tie it off. And this is where the rotary vise really pays for itself. Now, instead of wrapping this monofilament all the way around like this, constantly like this, which was time consuming, you can now use your rotary vise. And what we're doing is putting an armor coating, and incidentally, to keep the spaces even, keep pulling back like at this angle. If you go this way, you tend to get gaps. This way, in fact, I messed it up just showing you that. Keep it back here like this, and it'll make a beautiful armor-coated body, and you've got that sheen of that tinsel coming through. Then all you do now is wrap this off, and I never use my scissors to cut that. Instead, I use something called cuticle scissors. These cuticle scissors have little sharp points, and you can come in here and cut monofilament, and you don't dull your nice pair of scissors. Now, we're going to make this simply a little tiny white fly, white belly, brown back. So all we do now is just cut off some white bucktail. Don't want to make it too long. Remember, your glass minnows have a relatively short wing. Cut yourself a little taper. Add a little Flexament. Put your underbody on like this. Then some people will put just 2 or 3 strands, and I like that, just 2 or 3 strands doubled, so that you end up with about 6 strands of, I like rainbow crystal flash. If you're going to only use one crystal flash, I would recommend that rainbow color. If you get a wild one, I just cut it out of there. Okay, now we're going to have a little bit of a brown back here, so we just take a little bit of brown bucktail. Again, don't make these flies too long or make them too heavy, because they're supposed to look like minnows. Take all the excess out of here. Lay this up here. Cut it on an angle. A little bit of Flexament. And the fly basically is finished. We will, later on, we would want to paint eyes on here. I think painted eyes on a glass minnow really do help the fly. Very simple fly, very, very effective. This is one of the best flies I've ever seen for bonita, for example. And snook inshore really go for this fly because they feed a lot on glass minnow. To finish this fly, all we have to do is put a tiny little bit of glossy finish on here. And you can see closely where there's one little imperfection here where I was demonstrating that if you bring the material straight down or forward when you're wrapping a mono, you get a gap. This is all smooth. Just keep your monofilament pulled back at a slight angle while you're, or if you're wrapping, pull back against it each time you come around. This is all ready, and that they really take that thing for a small minnow, called a glass minnow. This is called a seducer. It's one of the oldest bass flies made. There are several articles written about this fly back in the 1880s and 90s. It was a very, very effective bass fly, particularly on largemouth, and still today is. It's a very good fly for shallow water for a number of reasons. Back in Joe Bates' first book on streamer flies, it was called the Homer Road shrimp fly, and it was at that time hopefully to imitate a shrimp. The last few years it's been called a seducer. Basically it's the same fly, and it has two attributes. One, these wound hackles act like miniature outriggers, and they keep the fly, they sort of suspend the fly and don't let it go down quickly. This fly can literally be fished in inches of water if you fish it real slow. Another attribute, because it is like little outriggers, if you strip the fly along and the fish comes up and kind of noses at it, you can stop and the fly will only very slightly sink because this is holding it out. It will hold itself in the same place in the water column longer than almost any other kind of fly. It's used mostly in shallow water. It's great redfish and snook fly. You can also use this with these loop of mono for a weed guard or regular wire weed guards, and even fish it in more floating grass type stuff, which you often find on redfish. The basic thing is you want the tails to splay out so that they kick, and they kick like a frog when you move them, and these hackles undulate back and forth. So you got everything on this fly working. Most of the modern flies have the crystal hair in it, or flashaboo, or some other type of flashy material. Let's look and see how one of these are tied, and it's really a pretty simple fly to tie. Very, very old pattern. Okay, first thing I want to mention is that this hook, you can use a standard hook, which is about this long, but if you want to put extra hackle on here so that it really suspends well, I would recommend using a longer hackle. I use both, but if you want something that really doesn't go down at all, use the longer hook. The longer hook I use is a 34011, 34011 Mustad. It's simply 2x long instead of the standard shank like this. Start back about a 1/4 inch or so from the end of the straight line, pop your thread, and wind her on like this. Now, take about 4 saddle hackles that go to the right and cut them out. And again, you can make these as long as you want. This is up to you. I generally like them about that long, maybe 2.5 to 3 inches long maximum. One of the things you don't want to do, incidentally, is strip this finish off of here, because what you're doing is tying on round stems and your feathers are going to roll. If you just trim them and just knock the fluff off, these now will lay exactly where you put them. What so many people will do, they'll take a feather and they'll strip this finish off of here, and then they'll try to tie on this round finish, and the fly will just roll all over the place for you. Okay, so now we take 4 more feathers from the other side, and we lay them up here and make sure they're about the same length. Tease the ends out, and they look like they're about the same length, so we cut them off here and just move back and knock the fluff out, but don't strip any of the feather out. Come back, position them together, put them on a slight bit of an X like this, and wrap them in. When you're finished, what you'll have is a thing that looks like this. It'll be splayed out. Okay, I like to put a little bit of crystal flash in there, and on brownish flies, I really like the copper finish. So I'll put a little bit of copper on one side, a little more copper on the other. And I think it really adds a little bit of realistic finish. Copper is a kind of a subdued color that you don't overwhelm the fly. One of the nice things about these rotaries is you can turn them around and see exactly where you're putting your material. The more you use a rotary vise, the better you're going to like it. Okay, cut them off at different lengths. Now, if you want, and you want to make sure that this thing stays splayed like this, what you can do is tilt this up like this and drop one drop of head cement or glue right in the middle of those feathers down in there. What you're doing is putting these so that they're right in the middle of these feathers. When that dries, that is really going to keep those stiff. Okay, now we're ready to put we're going to do is rotate this vise, and we're going to put in the feathers we want. What we're going to do is combine yellow and grizzly. Might show two tricks here that's worth knowing. Strip the finish off, tie both of them in together. Tie them right back here. A lot of people know this trick. Incidentally, all you need to do now is just lay this here. You don't have to lock it in or anything. Get a pair of hackle pliers and wrap your first feather. It helps if you put your hackle pliers down the length of the feather. It's better than putting them across. And if you want them to really splay out, pre-strip them like that so that they'll splay better for you. Now, one of the nice things about the rotary vise, you see, is this saves so much time. Now, what we've done is we've wrapped the grizzly hackle up, but the yellow hackle is still back there behind. Now, at this point, incidentally, if you pull on that, that will usually come right out of there and you won't lose your feather. If you have a little bit that sticks out, just trim that off. If you got a bunch that sticks out, you can push these back and wrap them back like that so that they stay there and they don't stick out here. Okay, now we want to wrap the yellow feather. Now, if you just wrap the yellow feather, what would probably happen, you'd mash some of this hackle down. But and a lot of people know this trick, but some don't, so we'll demonstrate it. Get on the quill, strip your feather. Now, as you wind, if you rock this back and forth, you'll find it doesn't mash any of your grizzly hackle down, and you can wind right straight through that and not damage any of mash down any of your hackle. Get out here. There's another way you can cut feathers too. If you hold on tight on a feather and keep your pincers locked, you can just push. Now you see here we have some yellow hackle sticking out. If we want to get rid of that, we can either trim it or we can just pull it back here and just make about 3 wraps like that, and that'll stay out of the way. Now we add another grizzly and another yellow, and we'll just about be done. And when you get out here and you're going to lock this last feather in, you can cut it off, do what you want, any way you want to get it off. But here's what I want to show you. Come in now and pull all this back, and that will fold this stuff out of the way. And when, particularly on saltwater flies, you want to make sure that you make a lot of wraps right there at the head, because sometimes these hook eyes are not closed perfectly. Okay, whip finish your head. Just a tad of glue and you got a seducer. Okay, there's a seducer fly. Now you can dress this up and tease this out. But what you have is a fly here now that's got frog kicker legs on it, and all this hackle is going to suspend this thing. And incidentally, this particular pattern is a very good a brown pattern, brown with a combination of red, yellow, and grizzly. Here's a wild hare, and I know a lot about hair, so I clipped that out of there. That's all there is to it. And that thing will set up like you wouldn't believe. It's a seducer. One of my favorite seducers, incidentally, is red and white. These are called Keys-style tarpon flies. Let me say one thing about all saltwater flies. We give them names like barracuda fly or striper fly or tarpon fly or bonefish fly, but a bonefish fly is a good snapper fly. A good striper fly is often a good fly for tarpon or something else. While they are specifically designed here and have certain purposes for this, these flies catch a lot of other kind of fish, so don't just think that a tarpon fly only catches tarpon or a striper fly only catches striper. Basically, a Keys tarpon fly, since you're fishing over fish that are in clear water that have high visibility, they see this thing very well. You'll notice if I lay my finger down, my little finger, that this tarpon fly is very much the same length as my finger. This is as long as we generally make tarpon flies for clear water fishing. In the Keys, most of the fish, the giant tarpon, we generally fish from 3.0 to 4.0. These same flies scaled down a little longer and on like a 1 or a 1.0 are very good for baby tarpon, like 20, 30-pound fish. The way these differ from the other kind of tarpon fly, which we'll tie next, is that they're very sleek, they're very streamlined. The shank is usually covered with either paint or thread. Sometimes we put an eye on, most of the time we don't. Generally, we often use fluorescent colored paint, although that's not necessary. You can also use fluorescent colored thread and cover it with clear coating. But what you do is you put a tail on that's generally in a splayed thing, somewhat like the seducer, and then you put a hackle collar on, which is then wrapped and folded back. Makes a very, very sleek fly, very rarely fouls, and is easy to cast. Let's look and see how we make a Florida Keys tarpon fly. Okay, we start a tarpon fly about this point, just a little beyond middle of the shank, and we work back to the left and stop while the shank is still straight. Now, some people, in order to keep the wings from fouling, will tie in a piece of wing quill or a piece of heavy monofilament here. Most of the time, we don't do that. You can if you want. The big thing I would like to point out about tarpon flies, it's been my experience over 40 years of fishing that tarpon will eat just about anything. It's interesting that one guide you'll go with has a secret fly nobody fishes with, but he won't tell you what it is. Another guy has another fly that's a secret, another guide, and another guy's got another secret. And you find out that all 3 flies or 4 flies are different, yet they're all catching fish on them. The big thing is just to get something in front of them. Tarpon generally will eat most anything. One of my favorite flies, and it's a wild fly, I don't even have a name for it, is this one I'm tying. We take some of these feathers and we get 4 of them that go to the right, and we bring them up, and remember we want to keep these short. So we'll put these over here. We trim these. Remember, just knock the fluff out. Don't strip the quill because that'll make it difficult to tie them down. Put them on a very slight angle just like we did on the seducer. And if you don't like them, which I don't there, you pick them up and you retie them. Sometimes by crimping the feathers, you'll find that they'll set up better for you. Okay, that one's on okay. Now we'll get 4 feathers that go to the left, which is the opposite direction. Put them together, and you can wet these if you want, but these are so short you don't normally have trouble. Get the same length feather, cut them off, knock the fluff out, put them back up on a slight X. Oh, should turn them that way. And what we have now is feathers that are kind of X'd like this. Okay, and incidentally, you can move feathers around. I don't think we talked about that. See, that's obviously too far, but you can move them back. Before you put your final wraps on here, that'll wrap them up real nicely. Okay, so we built ourselves a little body up here, wrap that in, go back against the feathers again. And I like this fly. It's got a hot pink wrap combined with these badgers. Strip the hackle off, tie it in here, wrap down, and then using that good old rotary vise again, wind her up real close together. Want to wind it real close together. Trim off any excess. Put another one in and just repeat the operation. Okay, we're ready to finish that off, and we're just about finished a major part of this fly. Now we wrap this a couple times. Trim off any excess out here. Now here's one of the things that's a hallmark to Keys flies. By swipping this stuff back, it protects this and lets these feathers not wrap on the hook. So what we do, and this is a little time consuming, but just wrap back, wrap all the way to the front. This takes a little while, but incidentally, remember to fill in right here at the eye so that there's no gap there and your leader don't get caught in that. Wrap back all the way, back down. Do this several times. And then finish it off. And now all you have to do is put your coat of clear cement on here. And I usually put about 3 coats of clear. Instead of painting this material, part of the body here, with paint, what I do is I actually use fluorescent colored thread of the color I want, and then just simply give it several coats. That's all there is to, and that thing, even though that's only this long, that will take a 150-pound fish. Okay, this is a whistler type fly, sometimes called Casimar tarpon fly. Basically, this fly differs from the saltwater fly we use for tarpon in clear water like the Keys, in that it's got weighted eyes, either bead chain or lead eyes. It's got much more bulk to it. And as you will see when I compare the two of them in a moment, you'll see that one is very sleek and one is very bulky. These flies are usually used either in very dirty water or they're very good at night, because what they do is the large heads on these eyes actually push water and give off vibration to fish sense. They're splayed wings. They've got lots of bucktail. What we're trying to do is create a lot of bulk. You can see the difference in these two flies if we look at them head on. You can see how much sleeker the Florida Keys fly is and how much bigger and bulky these flies are. They're very, very definitely much more bulk in this fly than there is in this. So what we're going to try to do is deliberately create a lot of bulk by building these feathers up heavy and putting a heavy eye on here. This is called a Whistler, which was developed by Dan Blanton. There's a number of patterns. They're all included in that book I showed you. But the main thing is we're trying to get something here that shoves through the water and makes a lot of disturbance. Okay, let's look at this and see how we tie one. What we're trying to do with this Whistler or with a Casimar type fly, tarpon fly, is create some bulk. So what we'll do is tie in a piece of chenille and only go up to about halfway on the hook. Hook your bobbin on the cradle. Good old rotary vise. We can build ourselves a nice body here. And you want to get a nice bulky body. When you get about halfway up, just about there, stop, trim that off, Get some bucktail. And you're going to use a fair amount of this time, because what we're trying to do is literally create bulk. We got a good bit here. Take the junk out of it. Put it up here. Cut on the slight taper. Add your flex cement. And wrap it right in there up against that chenille, which kicks it out this way. It's going to help us create bulk. Then we'll come forward just a little bit, and we'll put in another good hunk of purple deer hair. Big thing here is we're really trying to build some bulk. Don't want to really sparse this one up. Okay, in this case, we're going to trim it right so it goes right to the head, because we really want this to come all the way out to the head here, because we want to build a big fat head. Okay, again, we don't want this thing to come apart, so we put some flex cement on here. Bring it down. Pull any loose hair out. And you can see already we're developing a lot of bulk on this fly. Now we can use some saddle hackles, and you could add another color in here if you want. You can't hardly bulk this fly too much. I really like badger hackles for these tarpon flies. They work real well. We'll pick 4 out of here that go to the left. Trim those. 1, 2, 3, 4. Incidentally, the ones that turn to the left belong on the far side because they curve up. And again, we don't want to make this fly too short, not like a Keys fly. We really want to get some bulk. Fluff the mess out of here. Set them down on a slight angle so you get a little kick to the wings when you retrieve it. And then we take 4 that go to the right. Measure them to see that you got the same distance. Cut them off. Knock the fluff out. And put those in the opposite. So what we have is kind of like a bullfrog's legs. So what we have here now is really something that's beginning to really be a real bulky fly. Now we'll add a small piece of chenille, and most people use very large chenille for this. I recommend using fairly small chenille. It lets you build better bodies. Put the chenille in, then pick up a pair of bead eyes, or you can use lead eyes, either one, and set them in here and make a figure of 8. And you might want to put a drop of crazy glue on them. You don't have to. One little wild hair, trim it off. Just leave your bobbin set where it's at. Make a wrap or 2 back here, and kind of figure 8 through this. By using this smaller chenille, you have more control over how you build the body. A real big chenille doesn't allow you to do that, and you often get too much chenille in there where you don't want it. Okay, now we have a really serious head on here, which is what we want. Whip finish off, and you have a deep water type fly or a whistler type fly. There are a number of very exact patterns that Dan Blanton's worked out for whistlers that work very well, but mainly what you're trying to get here is you're trying to get all this bulk and this stuff to kick. Every time you pull, this stuff's going to go back. It's throwing shock waves. This big head's like a football pushing through the air, and all this stuff is pushing water. Put 1 drop of cement on there, and your fly's finished. This is not only a good fly for fishing tarpon in dirty water, but it's a very good fly where you have, anytime you have low visibility like in channels or when you're fishing at night, that thing really has a lot of bulk. That's it. Whistler type fly. If there ever was a fly that will tend not to underwrap on the cast, it's probably the high tie. The high tie is a very old pattern. It was tied many, many years ago, before the turn of the century, for bass fishermen, and in fact can be tied in reverse so that it comes up this way and be called the whisker bug and all sorts of things, and is near weedless fly that never fouls. The secret to this fly is that if you look at this carefully, there are a number of different individual sections of wing which are tied right here. This is a little bit of a time-consuming fly, but once tied, this fly will almost never foul. This, incidentally, is a very fine tarpon fly. Some of the older guides in the Keys used this fly many, many times until the more modern flies came along. Still a great fly. Let's see how we tie it. Pretty easy to do. Okay, put your thread right to the back end of the straight part of the shank. Get a tiny little bit of deer hair. I'd say 18, 20, 30 strands at the most. This is just smaller than a matchstick. And you lay it down here, pull all the goop out of it, and then cut it on a slight taper, just a slight taper, and position it right on top of the hook and wind right to the end of that taper. Then go back and just repeat this operation over and over. Now you can combine colors. You can use a multicolor, you can use a single color. And this wing, you try to keep this wing just a fraction shorter than the first wing. Again, you cut on a taper, not a lot, just a slight taper. Start right where you finished your last wrap. Wrap up to you're just about to the end of that. Then repeat the operation again until you have as much of this color as you want on the fly. Each time, make the wing just a fraction shorter than the one before it up here. Again, just make your wraps. And we'll put one more yellow on here. This is a very effective fly, and it's an old fly, and for some reason people take the attitude, well, if it's old, it can't be good. I don't like to take exception to that, being well over 60 myself, but believe me that this is a very, very effective fly. And this will be our final finish. Taper it. And this fly will almost never foul. Always make sure that you fill thread in these heads here, because a leader can get in that little gap in the hook if it's not been closed properly. Whip finish your fly. Paint the head and the fly is done. Okay, there are lots of situations in saltwater fly fishing where you need to protect the point of the hook from keeping it from snagging in weeds, floating grass, logs and stuff along the shoreline, mangrove roots, all sorts of places. A common thing has been to use a mono loop, which is okay, except that after you catch 2 or 3 fish, the soft mono usually becomes damaged and really isn't that tough. I like the wire weed guards on smaller hooks from, say, size 1/0 down. I use a trolling, stainless steel trolling wire, size 5, number 5 wire. On larger hooks, such as this hook here, I use number 7 wire. I find these 2 wires work very well. In some flies, such as a bonefish, I'll often use just a single wire, but where you're fishing the fly in pretty heavy cover or you really want to protect it, I find it a double wire weed guard, and you can see here that this is actually a double weed guard. It's actually, and it hooks up over here. It's important that these things do not fall behind the hook shank. They should, I mean the hook barb. They must fall in front. This thing is, to me, is much superior to monofilament weed guards, and there's a trick or two into making these things, but not that hard. So let's look at how you put a double weed guard on a fly. It's really a pretty simple technique. We're going to use number 5 stainless steel trolling wire, the same stuff they use offshore trolling. Number 5 is best for most of the flies up until about a 2.0 or 3.0. Then you might want to go to number 7 wire. Well, first thing you want to do is put a real good base of thread on here, wrapped good and tight. Take a piece of wire about 6 or 7 inches long and take a small pair of needle nose pliers and bend yourself a loop like that. Then what I do is bend just a very slight bend like this, so you only have a tiny small amount of bend like that. Okay, now what you do is put this wire down here, hook it so that it is in front of the barb. Don't let this little loop get behind the barb, and press down so that this wire is below the shank, so that the wire is bent down below the point of the hook. At that point, you now have where you need to bend. That right there. So all I do now is take this wire and bend it at a 90 degree angle. That means that when this fly is finally secured, this is going to set up on here without going behind the barb. Okay, what we do now is we go about 3/4 of the way back the hook shank and figure out where we're going to cut that wire, and we're going to cut that wire right about there. Okay, now it pays to go back up to the front, set this so there's a wire on either side, and that little horseshoe's hanging straight down, and make just a few wraps down the wire. This is going to let you know, this is a little bit long, so I'd like to cut that off just a little bit more. Now at this point, I usually use crazy glue or some similar type glue rather than using a head cement, and I put a drop all along the hook shank like this. I really want to anchor that stuff. Now, go back to the end of the wire and really wrap nice and tight and secure the entire wire, all the way back up to the beginning of the fly. Okay, I know this sounds like overkill, but go back. You don't have to go all the way, but return and wrap again. This is going to prevent this thing from coming off of there. Okay, at this point now, what we can do is we can put in our body material, whatever we want to use. In this case, I'll use some yellow chenille. And if you return this and put it in front of the wire, you can now use the bobbin cradle, and if you got a rotary vise, just by having this wire hanging straight down, we can tie the fly without it getting in the way, but you do have to install the wire first. Okay, now we have our body up here. Take the wire out from behind the guard. Just lock it in, cut it off. We're ready to put our wing on. Once we got the wing on, we're in good shape, and you've got yourself a nice weedless fly. The trick here is not to tie the exact pattern, but simply to show you how to put the wire on. If you wanted to, you could also add flash of blue or crystal flash, and what you do is build this right up to the eye of the hook. Make sure you get a good number of wraps right where the wire comes down out of the fly. Okay. Now here's where that whip finish comes in too. So you can make a large loop and lay these things exactly where you want. A whip finishing tool would make this difficult. Coat your head with some cement. Now we can check the guard. And this guard can be adjusted now. If this is too long, you could just bend it a little bit. Actually, this one's perfect. And what you want is you want the bend of this wire to be slightly lower than the point of the hook. That way anything coming along, remember this is just going to push the fly out of the way. It's not going to push the vegetation out of the way. Permit are probably the most difficult of all fish to take on the fly. And the last couple of years we've been making epoxy imitations of crab, their favorite food, and that's worked well. In fact, we've caught more permit in the last couple of years than we caught in the last 25 or 30 years on fly rod. The problem is that epoxy flies are very difficult to make, time-consuming, and just a bear to fool with. This is a fly that Del Brown of California developed, who does a lot of fishing in the Keys. He calls it Del's Merkin. Actually, you can change the pattern colors. This, as you see, is a brown with a little bit of mottling. This one is kind of gray and green. You can make them all one color. One of the very best ones, of course, is plain cream, which imitates ghost crabs. But these things anybody can make. They're very quick to tie. I'd say just a few minutes you can tie one. They're made out of rug yarn and rubber bands and a couple feathers and a pair of lead eyes. And we'll now show you how to tie the Del's Merkin, and it's one of the easiest flies you can tie. Very, very effective on permit. When you're going to make a Del's Merkin, what you want to use is Aunt Lydia's rug yarn. You can use other types of yarn, but we find that Aunt Lydia's seems to work best. It's stiff and it's rugged and it's got a nice sheen to it. That's L-Y-D-I-A-S, Aunt Lydia's rug yarn. Get it in a lot of rug stores. What you do is cut about 8 or 10 pieces about this long and lay them down at the bottom of your vise and get them ready before you start. And all you need for this is a couple feathers, some rug yarn, a pair of lead eyes, and a couple rubber bands. Okay, first thing you do is you install the lead eye. Put it back at least a 1/4 inch. And again, I make those two little balls of thread which let me lock that lead eye right here in between the two balls. Seems to hold it better. Doesn't seem to twist around as much. Just figure eight this thing a few times, then go under, but never go don't go under the shank. Just go under the eye, over, under the eye, over, under the eye, over. After you do that a few times, make a few more figure of eights, and then move the line back to the end of the straight part of the shank of the eye. At this point, just choose 2 feathers of whatever color you want. I'm going to make sort of a basically tanned rug fly this time. And you don't want these long. You want them short. Cut them off, knock the fluff out, put them on a slight angle so that they will be sort of like a 45 degree. Then do the opposite side the same way with 2 more feathers. And again, keep these short. You don't want these real long. I'm not even sure that these are necessary, but we've been doing it so long that I'm getting so old I don't tend to change. You may not even have to put these on, but we do. So what you have now is sort of a little X of feathers. Incidentally, if you want to open an X, you can put line in here, you see, and kick them open more if you want to, so you can flare them more if you want. If you want to flare the other one just a little more, you could put one thread down here, you see, and flare them. So you can use the thread to adjust these any way you want. I'm going to put them up here like this so they're kicked out this way. And all we do is just do a series of figure of 8 ties. We bring this in here, 1 or 2 wraps, go behind, and 1 or 2 wraps. Now we'll put another one in. We're just going to repeat this operation. Takes a little time, but That's all there is to it. Now, after you've done each wrap, try to do almost like you do with bucktail. Squeeze them back, because you want to get them kind of tight together. At this point, I'm going to put a leg in, and this stuff is a rubber that you get for bass time bass jigs, and you can pull strips off of it. So what we're going to do is put a strip in here. I'll put it up on top where I can work it better and you can't see as good. Pull this back and lay the rubber in here and wrap it so that it's right up against the rug yarn. Again, all you do is figure-8 the material. Now, you can adjust these by pulling them around like that. This is obviously in the way, so I just cut it off. Now we just repeat the operation, pull all this back, put another piece of rug yarn up, figure-8 it in. Don't worry if you don't have this in real tight, because later on we're going to glue all this stuff. Now we're just about finished. Now what we have is something that looks like nothing, and whoever figured this thing out in the first place amazes me. Okay, we whip finish this off. And we're ready to finish up the fly. Now, try to straighten all this stuff up so it's parallel or at right angles to the shank like this. Then if you take a mustache comb or any fine comb and begin to comb this stuff, you'll find that it's going to get nice and fluffy for you. It takes a little minute, time consuming to do it, but and it looks crazy, I know, but it really works in the end. Okay. Now untwist your yarn a little bit, helps to comb it out. You can also use a dubbing needle to comb it out this way. If you don't have a mustache comb, you can comb it out this way. The big thing is to get this stuff separated from the braided material. Looks like the devil, but works good. Okay, now what we basically got is a fluffed out mess. And what we're going to do now is pull the rubber bands away. Just get the hold of those and pull them out of your way. 1, 2. Make sure you leave all the fluff up here, because you're going to use that to trim with. Get these out of the way, and what we now do is basically trim this to the rough shape of a crab. Don't cut your feathers. Okay. And then what we do is simply repeat that operation on the other side. Nice thing about these, I keep talking about rotary vices, but the nice thing about a rotary vice, it sure does make life easier for you when you're working fly tying. Now we'll do some final combing here, and 1 or 2 little more things, and the crab's done. Now we can do a little bit of dressing up. Comb it out. And then do some final trimming here. Okay, now we do 2 or 3 things. We'll take a brown marker and just make some marks on the legs, which kind of adds some realism. You can also tie knots in the legs if you want to make them even look more realistic. And the knots, you don't want these things to be symmetrical. And then you can also touch your fly and add some little mottled colors to it too. And you can touch some brown on here. You can take some black and put a couple little black spots in here so that it doesn't look just completely mottled. And then if you want, you can shorten these legs or you can leave them as long as you want. The one thing you don't want is you don't want one side legs longer than the other, so what? Because that'll make it spiral. So what I generally do is just pick them up gently like this. I pick all 6 of them up together and try to cut them to the same length. Now they're all pretty much the same length. The last thing you do is you bring this over and put a length of flex cement all along here. And what will happen now is that you'll lock all those loose wrap threads and everything together. And what you have when you get done is a fly that actually looks like this. These are crab flies, look like the devil, work beautiful. Very, very effective fly for permit. This is a braided barracuda fly developed by a guy named Mike Connors in Miami. And the problem, we used to make these out of long fish hair, altar hair, and things like this, but they were fluffed up and got all messed up and everything else. Mike started braiding these things together and then tying this at the back end to keep the braid together. And it's worked very, very well. And you do it really the way you'd plait a girl's hair. And we use this in this bright orange. We also use a combination of white, green, and blue, which is what I'm going to tie. And these 2 braids seem to be the 2 best colors. A wide blue a barracuda that might weigh 20 pounds would eat something this skinny, I don't know, but they sure do. And it's an easy fly to cast, too. It's almost like casting an empty hook. Let's look and see how we tie a braided barracuda fly. This is fish hair. You can also use ultra hair or a number of other hairs, synthetic hairs that are long. This is about 12 inches long. It does get tangled, and one of the ways to kind of straighten it is to take a metal comb. I generally use a dog's comb and straighten it out this way. What you don't ever want to do is comb this stuff with a plastic comb. You'll get so much static electricity you can't believe it. So we're going to use, first we're going to use white fish hair, and we don't use much of this. This is a really almost like a needlefish type fly, and needlefish, of course, are very, very slender, sleek fish. Just go up here and just pull any of the loose stuff out by holding on the back end, and then trim it. You don't really have to glue this because you're going to do a lot of wrapping and it's never going to come loose. Now we put the first one on here like this. That's the white. Then we take some green, about the same amount, cut it off, go up here at the far end and pull all the loose stuff out because there's stuff in here that's of different lengths. Then go to the front end and do the same thing. That way you'll get rid of stuff that's too short one way or the other. Cut it off and put it just forward of the white. And then take your blue and about the same amount of blue. Again, go to the back end, pull any loose strands out that are short, go to the front end, pull any loose short out here, trim this, lay it down. Now, many needlefish and ballyhoo have a red nose, so we just make the whole front of this hook with red thread, which we will then coat with clear cement. And that looks like that little red nose on them. Now we can whip that off. Regular whip finish. And lay your thread down where it's going to be handy because you're going to use it after a while. Now what you have is white, blue, and green, and what we're going to do is actually weave these things or plait them together to end up with about a 6-inch fly. You separate the 3 different colors, green, blue, and white, and what you do is just roll the right over the left, left over right, And what you're doing really is just like you'd braid a lady's hair. You don't have to make the braids real tight, just so they're braided. What we're trying to do is keep this fly together, that's all. We're not really trying to make a real snug rope out of it. And you continue to braid this thing just like you braid a hair. Now, if you're a bald-headed guy and don't know how to braid hair, ask your wife. Let's do one or two more of these. See the braiding? Now you finish up the braid, and I always look a little loose stuff out here. And what I do is just take some thread, wrap it around here a couple times, and then pull this straight, tighten it off. And if you remember how to whip finish, you just whip finish this tail. Trim the loose ends off, put a little glue on there, and you got a braided barracuda fly. Add a little bit, just a tiny bit of glue to that so it doesn't come loose. And what you have now is a braided barracuda fly. Don't ask me why barracudas eat it, but they do. These are pop flies. Pop flies were developed by one of the better fly tyers I know on saltwater, Bob Popovich from New Jersey. And they are very, very tough flies. They also generally do not foul on the cast, and they look very realistic in the water. What you're basically doing is tying a simple streamer fly, whatever color you like. Once the fly is tied, you glue these eyes on, which I'll tell you about as I tie the fly, and then simply coat them with 5-minute epoxy. This may sound complicated, it really isn't. This fly has epoxy all the way to the end of the shank. This one only has epoxy to here. I generally do them just like this, but sometimes this way. That's a choice you can make. This is a pretty simple fly to tie, actually, and the technique is very, very good, and I suspect that it's going to be used more and more as time goes on. Let's look and see how we tie a pop fly. Okay. Wrap your thread back about halfway on the hook shank. We're going to use ultra hair. And this fly, of course, can be made any length that you want to make it. In this case, I'd like to make it about this long. So you cut it on an angle. You don't have to glue this because, remember, let the hair go clear to the front end. Remember, we're going to glue this thing with epoxy, so there's no need to glue this. It's not going to go anywhere. And I'd like to have a little bit of smoke-colored ultra hair in here, too. One of the things I want to point out about this ultra hair I really like, I don't know if you can see these up and down serrations in the way this stuff is made, but in the water it really does look like a fly that has scales on it. And we'll put this in here. Now I want a little bit of flash, so I'll put a few strands of crystal flash in here, right in the middle. Wind it down, and you want to build this up. Now we need to put on some final topping. In this case, we'll just use some peacock herl, which is pretty stuff. And cut that on a taper. Again, we don't have to worry about using a finish on here or glue, because we're going to epoxy this whole thing. And we want to build a fairly good sized head, because remember, we're going to have to glue an eye on here. So what we'll do now is build this head up. What we've done now is build a large head. We have to build a large head because you're going to see why in a minute, but we need to build a large head. We've built this up well, and we'll whip finish this off. Won't need any glue on this because the epoxy is going to take care of that. So now we've got this up here, and from Witchcraft in box 937, Colma, Michigan, 49038, we buy these eyes. And these things have a little bit of glue on them. And if we pick them off with a needle, if I'm lucky, we put those on either side. Now they're not going to stay, but don't worry about that because the epoxy is going to take care of that. Then, and the nice thing about that rotary vise is you can move things around. So now we put another eye on this side. Whoop. Put another eye on this side. So now we have two eyes on either side. Just press them against the thread. They won't stay long, but they'll stay long enough. Okay, now all we got to do is finish up the head by mixing some epoxy. We're going to coat this head with 5-minute epoxy. You can use lots of different kinds of epoxies, but I particularly like this kind that comes in these little bottles. You can get it in smaller bottles or bigger bottles. And what I like about it is that it will last for months and months. These are a couple months old already. And what we want to do is we want to put equal parts in this cup. And I just pour them together, and that way hopefully they'll come out even. If they're not exactly right, that's not going to make any difference. When you put them back, make sure you put the red cap on the red cap and the blue cap on the blue cap, or you'll buy another bottle. Now what we do is just mix that very, very well. And you want to mix this for about a minute and a half. Okay. Now just dump some epoxy on the fly. Don't worry, just spread it all around the thing. Don't worry about it being actually even, because we're going to take care of that in a minute. Just smear it all over the thing. Now this stuff is going to sag all over the place, you see. So what we want to do is if I hold it this way, it sags to the back. If I want it to go around a little bit on the side here, down on this bottom, round to there. If I wanted it to go down here a little bit, it'll run down to there. In other words, while this is in a real fluid state, you can move this thing around any way you want. And we're going to have, this is 5-minute epoxy, so it's probably going to take 5 minutes. But this is a very indestructible fly, and these eyes really make a difference. Okay, that's about it. So I'll set it up here in the vise once, or hold it up like this, and you can see that's what a pop fly looks like. Very, very effective fly. These are two of many different kinds of popping bugs. Popping bugs are something that goes across the surface, and every time you yank on the line, it pops or makes a gurgling sound, and many people know what they are. This is a large popping bug, which we can use quite often, and it's made out of ethafoam. We're going to make one out of ethafoam. This one is made out of ethafoam or several other different materials. One of them called live body, which is very, very good. This fly is called a Bob's Banger, and I really like this fly. What you can do is pull this off and put different color or different size heads on. This has a hole in it. We'll show you how to make one. Simply slips on there, and this gives you the ability to change colors of tails, colors of heads, size of heads, or lengths of hook flies. Gives you a lot more mobility than gluing one on the first place. But what we're going to do is a regular popping bug, and talk a little bit about design, and then do this one, which is called a Bob's Banger. These are the two basic poppers that you would use for saltwater fly fishing. Basically, these are tools that you can use to make superior popping bugs. Looks like a mishmash of things, but it really isn't. These are punches, tubing punches, and cork punches, some people call them, but you can buy them in laboratory supply houses, and they come in all sizes, as you can see, and stacked together, and they've got a sharp edge on them. I'm going to use one of those simply because they work better. However, if you don't want to use that, you can literally get different pieces of copper tubing and punch out holes by sharpening the outside edge of this. So you can actually make them out of this if you want to. These are just nicer. They're cork borers, a lot of people call them. And they're very nice and they work very well. You can make your popping bugs out of beach sandal soles, which is pretty light and pretty tough. You can make them out of ethafoam, which is probably as lighter than a feather, literally, and tougher than a bad mother-in-law, and really what I use most of the time. You can also buy slugs or cylinders that you buy about this size in about 10 or 12 different diameters. They have a catalog that you can write for, and you can cut them. You can put them in a drill press and actually rotate them and hold a sander against them and shape them like this. And this really is a very easy way to make extremely difficult, tough poppers. This is called live body material. What we're going to do right now is show you that if you wanted to make one out of ethafoam, you simply would just drill through this ethafoam like this. Ethafoam is E-T-H-A-F-O-A-M, and it's made by Dow Chemical, and it's used as a packaging material. You can make a slug like that. And if you want to make it shorter or longer, you just simply make the block thicker. What I'm going to do is show you a basic way that I like to make popping bugs. The first thing I do is I cut these things on a like a little 45-degree angle. Not quite 45, but just a slight taper like that. Then I cut the bottom off, and I taper the outside edges just a little bit. Again, poppers do not have to be, first of all, color doesn't mean a darn thing. It's for the fly fisherman. Most fish will hit on any kind of color of popper. I just taper this, and the reason I'm taking all this off the back of here is simply to reduce air resistance. Now, I want to glue this on a hook. So what I do is I cut a groove that is like a 45-degree slot or groove, V-shaped groove out of here, which you pick out like that. And then what I'm going to do is lay this hook down in here and glue it. What I've done is build a groove down in this piece of ethafoam, and you could do that same thing with live body or with a beach sandal sole, and put this in here like this. And then what we're going to do is take a clothespin and position this so that this thing sits straight in here. Now we take this out, and we take goop, which is one of the finest glues I know. And what we're going to do is fill that groove with goop. And this is some kind of glue. It's one of the best glues I've ever seen. You can glue just about anything with it. I've repaired raincoats, camera boxes, tents. Put the top back on because it does dry out quick. Now we have the goop on here. We set this right down in here like this. And what I'm going to do, and you want this hook eye to be close to the bottom. People put them way up in the center of the body of the hook, or the body of the bug, and what happens is it makes it difficult to lift that fly out of the water. I like the bottom right close, and I smooth this over, and when this is dry, this makes a super nice bug. And basically that's all we need to do to make a simple popping bug. This will dry, set up dry. Once it's dry, it'll look like this. Bob's Banger is a different kind of fly and also rather easy to make. Bob's Banger, you can buy these tubes already pre-cut from Dale Clemens, and let's say we want one that is this big around. And if you roll this all the way around, you tend to get a fairly straight cut. And let's say we're going to use this one here. What we're going to do, and I've already tied this ahead of time, I've simply tied a hook with some cactus chenille. You can use regular chenille or anything on here, but something stiff to enlarge this thing. And we're going to make this a hole in here and insert this on here. If you like, you can put tape on them like this if you want to, and glue eyes on here with a little epoxy over them. But quite frankly, just a straight white popper works fine. And you can make these in different sizes. You could make one that was this size, and you could make them smaller or bigger. What we're going to do basically now is put a hole here. Now you can drill a hole through here, but drilling a hole through there usually results in a jagged hole. Now all I did was take an ordinary clothes hanger like this and cut a piece out of this clothes hanger. And what you do is heat your clothes hanger, and this incidentally, in ethafoam or any kind of foam like this, for example, this is a foam here, this heated wire makes this the smoothest hole, and what it does, it sears the hole. So all we do here is heat this up and try to make a nice straight hole. Now it's cooled off, so I just heat it up again. Go through, and now what I have is a hole through this fly, and all I've got to do to put this fly together is simply put her through like that, and you've got a dandy popping boat. If you wanted to, you could cut one of these in half and sear a hole in it and have a different size popping boat. This is one of the simplest flies you can make. Looks lousy, works great. Well, that's it. I guess you realize that there are many, many other kinds of flies you can tie. In fact, I have a book called Saltwater Fly Patterns. It lists 268 flies. But these techniques are the techniques used for probably 80, maybe even 90% of the flies we've shown today. As you can see, it's a lot different in how you tie saltwater flies, even though some of the techniques are basically the same. The great thing about this is that there seems to be more and more new patterns coming on every day. And I think one of the nicest things about saltwater fly fishing, or any kind of fly fishing, is that you can actually tie the flies that you catch the fish with. I hope this tape helps you do that.